The plates shattered before anyone understood why. Illyra stood frozen in the middle of the great hall, the tray of untouched bread slipping from her hands, as every wolf in the room turned toward the doors. The scent hit her first, sharp and commanding, like thunder rolling across dry land. Then came the silence. Even the fire in the hearth seemed to hold its breath. Alpha King Chaol Draven had arrived 3 days early. No one had expected him. The banners were only half hung. The tables were not yet set with the good silver. And Illyra, the Omega everyone in Ashwood Pact pretended not to see, was standing in the center of the hall holding a shattered tray at the worst possible moment. "Move," someone hissed behind her, shoving her aside without even looking at her face. She stumbled, but caught herself against the wall, pressing her back to the cold stone, as pack members rushed past her, to arrange themselves in neat rows, chins lifted, spines straight, every one of them desperate to be noticed by the most powerful alpha in the entire Western Territory. Illyra did not rush forward. She had learned long ago that rushing forward only ended in humiliation. She stayed at the edge of the room, half hidden by a pillar, and watched as the doors opened fully. Chaol Draven entered like a storm-given shape. He was taller than any wolf she had ever seen, with dark hair swept back, and eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning struck. His presence did not simply fill the room. It bent the room around itself, the way gravity bends light. Every wolf in Ashwood dropped into a bow, necks exposed, voices murmuring respectful greetings. Illyra bowed too, though no one was watching her do it. 3 weeks. That was how long it had been since her own rejection, since Daemon Ashwood, her fated mate and heir to this very pack, had stood in front of everyone and called her weak, called her plain, called her a waste of a bond. She had felt the words land like physical blows, had felt the pack's eyes on her, some pitying, most simply indifferent, as if her pain were nothing more than mildly interesting gossip. She had not cried in front of them. She had promised herself that much. Now, watching the Alpha King stride through the hall with the kind of authority that made grown alphas shrink, Illyra felt something else stir inside her chest. Not attraction, not hope. Something quieter and stranger, something that had lived inside her since she was a child, coiled tight and hidden, waiting. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Never let them hear it, Illyra. Never, unless your life depends on it." She did not know why those words came to her now, watching a king she would never speak to, in a hall where she was less than furniture, but the feeling lingered, cold and electric, curling low in her stomach like a warning. "Get back to the kitchens," snapped Odette, the head of household staff, appearing suddenly at Illyra's elbow. Odette's lip curled with the particular disdain she reserved only for Illyra, a disdain that had grown sharper since the rejection, as if Illyra's failure to be chosen had somehow personally offended her. "The king does not need to see kitchen staff wandering the hall like lost animals." "Yes, Odette." Illyra kept her eyes down and gathered the broken pieces of the tray, ignoring the way her fingers trembled, not from fear of Odette, but from something else entirely. Something she could not name. She slipped through the side door into the narrow servants' corridor, the noise of the hall fading behind her, replaced by the clatter of the kitchen ahead. Steam rose from enormous pots. Cooks shouted orders. The scent of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, and for a moment, Illyra allowed herself to breathe. This was her place. Not the hall, not the pack's inner circle. Here, among boiling pots and flour-dusted counters, no one expected anything from her except competence, and competence she could give. "You look like you saw a ghost," said Marla, one of the younger kitchen girls, glancing up from a mountain of chopped vegetables. "Was it him? The king?" "He walked in early," Illyra said, setting the broken tray pieces on the counter. "Nearly ran me over." Marla's eyes went wide. "You saw him up close?" "Not really. I was too busy trying not to be crushed by everyone rushing to bow." Marla laughed, but there was an edge of nervous excitement in it. "They say he's unmated. 28 years old and still no Luna. My aunt says the elders are getting anxious. A king without a queen is a kingdom without an heir." Illyra said nothing. Royal politics meant little to an Omega who could barely manage her own pack's opinion of her. She busied herself wiping down the counter, grateful for the mindless work. grateful for anything that kept her hands moving and her thoughts quiet. But the strange feeling in her chest did not fade. If anything, it grew heavier as the evening wore on, as preparations for the welcoming feast consumed the entire pack. Illyra worked without pause, carrying trays, scrubbing pots, straightening linens, doing everything asked of her and more, because that was what Omegas without status did. They worked, they stayed invisible, they survived. By the time the feast began, the great hall had transformed. Candles lined every table. The banners, finally hung properly, bore the crimson and gold of Ashwood Pack beside the black and silver of the king's royal line. Every wolf of rank sat at the long tables, dressed in their finest, laughing too loudly, trying too hard to catch the king's attention as he sat at the head table beside Alpha Garin, the pack's leader. Illyra stood along the back wall with the other serving staff, a jug of wine in her hands, refilling cups when signaled, and otherwise remaining as still and unnoticed as the stone pillars around her. From her position, she had a clear view of the head table. Of Chaol Draven, seated with an ease that somehow made him seem even more dangerous, his sharp eyes occasionally scanning the room, as though searching for something no one else could see. Of Daemon, her former mate, seated 2 chairs down, his arm draped possessively around Priya, the beta female he had chosen over her. Priya caught Illyra's eye across the room and smiled, slow and satisfied, the kind of smile designed to remind Illyra exactly where she stood in the world. Illyra looked away first. She always did. "More wine for the king's table," Odette murmured, appearing beside her with a fresh pitcher. "Take it yourself, and try not to embarrass us." Illyra's stomach tightened, but she nodded, taking the pitcher with steady hands, despite the nerves fluttering beneath her ribs. She had served nobility before. She knew how to move quietly, how to pour without spilling, how to disappear the moment her task was finished. She approached the head table just as laughter erupted from a cluster of higher-ranking wolves seated near Priya. Their voices carried easily over the general noise of the feast, sharp with mockery. "Did you hear?" Priya was saying, loud enough for half the hall to catch, "that the Omega who got rejected still works in this pack? I would have run off somewhere no one knew my shame." More laughter. Illyra's hands tightened around the pitcher, but she kept walking, kept her face carefully blank, kept her eyes fixed on the king's cup as she reached the table. "Your wine, Alpha King," she said softly, tilting the pitcher. Chaol's storm-gray eyes flicked toward her for the briefest moment, an assessment so quick she almost missed it, before returning to the conversation Alpha Garin had been pressing on him about trade routes and border patrols. She poured carefully, precisely, and stepped back. That was when Priya's voice rose again, sweeter now, more deliberate. "Actually," she said, standing from her seat, "I think we should have some entertainment tonight, something special, for our honored king." The hall quieted slightly, curious. "Illyra," Priya continued, turning toward her with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "why don't you sing for us? You always claimed you had such a beautiful voice, didn't you? Back when you thought Daemon would actually want you." A ripple of laughter spread through the nearby tables. Illyra felt her face heat, felt the old humiliation rise in her throat like bile. She had never claimed anything of the sort. She had never sung in front of anyone in her life, not since she was a small child, not since her mother had warned her, again and again, never let them hear it. "I don't sing," Illyra said quietly, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. "Oh, come now," Priya pressed, delighted at the attention she was drawing. "Don't be modest. In fact, I think you should sing the Luna hymn. It's only fitting, isn't it? A song for the woman worthy enough to stand beside a king. Perhaps it will remind you of everything you'll never be." The cruelty of it landed precisely as intended. The Luna hymn was sacred, sung only at formal matings and coronations, reserved for true Lunas and no one else. For an Omega, especially a rejected one, to sing it was not just embarrassing, it was a mockery of everything Illyra had lost. Murmurs spread through the hall. Some wolves looked uncomfortable. Others, especially those close to Priya's circle, looked delighted, eager for the spectacle. Alpha Garin, sensing an opportunity to entertain his royal guest, chuckled and waved a hand. "Go on then, girl. Sing for the king. Let's see what all the fuss is about." Illyra's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to refuse. to set down the pitcher and walk away, to endure whatever punishment came later, rather than expose herself to this. But refusing an alpha's direct command, especially in front of the entire pack and a visiting king, carried its own consequences. Consequences that could mean expulsion, or worse. She glanced toward Chaol Draven, some foolish part of her hoping he might intervene, might dismiss the request as beneath his attention. But the king simply watched her with an unreadable expression, his storm-gray eyes steady and assessing, giving no indication of what he thought or wanted. "Sing," Alpha Garen repeated, his tone edging toward impatience. The hall had gone almost entirely silent now. Every eye turned toward her. Alira set the pitcher down on the edge of the table, with hands that had begun, despite everything, to steady themselves. Something inside her, that same coiled and hidden thing that had stirred when Chaol first entered the hall, uncurled slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Never let them hear it, unless your life depends on it. Perhaps, Alira thought, with a strange and sudden clarity, this was exactly that moment. She stepped forward, away from the shadows along the wall, into the open space before the head table, where every wolf could see her plain gray dress, her unremarkable face, her downcast eyes now slowly lifting. Priya's smile widened, anticipating disaster. Damon looked almost bored, already certain of how this would end. Alira closed her eyes, and she began to sing. The first note left her lips soft and low, barely more than a breath, and yet it seemed to fill every corner of the vast hall at once, curling around the pillars, rising toward the high wooden beams above. It was not loud, it did not need to be. There was something underneath the sound itself, something ancient and resonant, a vibration that seemed to settle into the very bones of everyone listening. The laughter died instantly. Marla, still near the kitchen door with a tray forgotten in her hands, felt her breath catch. Odette, halfway through scolding a younger servant, stopped mid-sentence, her mouth still open, her eyes wide. Even the fire in the great hearth seemed to burn differently, the flames bending as though listening. Alira's voice rose through the first verse of the Luna hymn, the ancient words flowing from her as though she had sung them every day of her life, though she had never once practiced them, had never even heard the full song performed before. The melody was beautiful, in a way that felt impossible, layered with something beneath the notes themselves, a power that pressed against the chest of everyone in the room, like a physical weight, gentle, but undeniable. Alpha Garen's cup slipped from his fingers and clattered against the table, wine spilling unnoticed across the fine linen. Priya's triumphant smile had frozen into something else entirely, something caught between confusion and dawning horror, as though she had lit a spark expecting a small flame, and instead summoned a wildfire. And at the head of the table, Chaol Draven, Alpha King of the Western Territories, ruler of 100 packs, a man who had faced down rival kings without flinching, sat utterly still, his wine untouched, his storm-gray eyes locked on the rejected Omega standing before him. His wolf, silent and dormant for longer than he could remember, surged violently beneath his skin, clawing toward the surface with a desperation that stole the breath from his lungs. He knew that resonance. He had heard it only once before, decades ago, in a story told to him as a child by the pack elders, a story about a bloodline so powerful, so sacred, that entire kingdoms had been built around finding and protecting it. A bloodline everyone believed had vanished from the world 3 generations ago. Chaol's hands curled into fists against the table as Alira's voice soared into the second verse, and the entire hall, hundreds of wolves who moments ago had been laughing and mocking, now sat in absolute reverent silence, unable to look away, unable to breathe, caught entirely in the grip of a song that should not have been possible. Something ancient had just woken in Ashwood Pack, and Chaol Draven, king of 100 packs, found himself completely, helplessly frozen. The silence stretched on long after Alira's final note faded into the rafters. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the servants standing near the kitchen doors seemed unable to remember their duties, their trays forgotten in their hands, their eyes fixed on the Omega who had just filled the entire hall with something none of them had words for. Alira opened her eyes slowly, disoriented, as though waking from a dream she had not chosen to enter. The weight of every gaze in the room settled on her at once, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment she simply stood there, unsure of what had just happened, unsure of why her chest felt hollowed out and trembling. Then Alpha King Kale Draven rose from his chair. The sound of it, wood scraping against stone, seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Every wolf in the hall flinched at once, turning toward him, waiting. Alira's heart slammed against her ribs. She had sung the sacred hymn in mockery, at another woman's cruel suggestion, in front of the most powerful alpha in the Western Territories. Whatever happened next, she was certain it would not be kind. But Kale did not look angry. He looked shaken, in a way that seemed almost impossible for a man built like a mountain, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room he entered. His storm-gray eyes remained fixed on her, searching, cataloging, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly appeared without warning. "Who taught you that song?" His voice cut through the silence, low and controlled, though something beneath it trembled with barely restrained intensity. Alira swallowed hard. "No one, Your Majesty. I have never sung it before tonight." A murmur rippled through the hall. Disbelief and confusion tangled together. Priya, still frozen near her seat, looked as though she wanted to disappear entirely, her earlier triumph replaced by something close to panic. "That is not possible," Kale said, stepping around the head table, his movements deliberate, predatory, in a way that made several nearby wolves shrink back instinctively. "No one sings the Luna hymn like that without training, without a bloodline." Alpha Garen, recovering some of his composure, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, she is a kitchen servant, an Omega, recently rejected by my son, in fact. I assure you, there is nothing remarkable about her lineage." "Recently rejected," Kale repeated, his gaze flicking briefly toward Damon, who shifted uncomfortably under the sudden attention, before returning to Alira. "And yet she sings with a resonance that has not been heard in this territory for 3 generations." Alira felt every eye in the hall shift back to her, the whispers growing louder now, curious and calculating in equal measure. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the stone floor beneath her feet, to escape the weight of a scrutiny she had never once experienced in her 22 years of quiet, careful invisibility. "Tell me about your mother," Kale said, stopping directly in front of her now, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming, a controlled power that pressed against her senses like a physical force. "My mother passed away when I was young," Alira said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "She came to Ashwood Pack before I was born. I know very little about where she was from." "Her name?" "Ren." She never spoke of her family, or her old pack. She said it was better that way. Alira hesitated, then added, almost against her will, "She used to tell me never to sing in front of others. She said it would attract attention we could not afford." Something shifted in Kale's expression, a flicker of recognition so quick that Alira almost missed it. He turned sharply toward Alpha Garen. "Where is this woman buried? I want her records. Birth documents, pack transfer papers, anything that exists." Alpha Garen's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, I do not see why a servant's lineage matters so greatly to—" "Because," Kale interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that silenced the entire hall instantly, "if I am correct, this pack has been harboring, and mistreating, a descendant of the Sable Moon bloodline for over 2 decades, without ever recognizing what they had." The words landed like a thunderclap. Even those in the hall unfamiliar with old pack histories seemed to sense the gravity of the statement from the reactions around them. Several elder wolves at nearby tables rose to their feet, murmuring the name to one another with something close to disbelief. "The Sable Moon line was lost," one elder said, his voice trembling. "Wiped out generations ago. Every pack in the Western Territories has searched for survivors since the Great Purge." "Apparently not entirely lost," Kale said, his gaze never leaving Alira's face. "Apparently one branch survived, hidden here, disguised as nothing more than a kitchen servant." Alira's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Sable Moon. The name meant nothing to her directly, and yet something about it resonated faintly, like a half-remembered dream, like a word her mother had once whispered late at night, when she thought Alira was asleep. "I do not understand," Alira said quietly, unable to stop herself. "What is the Sable Moon bloodline? Why does it matter?" Kale studied her for a long moment before answering, and when he spoke, His voice had softened slightly, though the intensity behind his eyes remained unchanged. The Sable Moon line was the oldest and most sacred bloodline among all shifter packs. Its women were born with voices capable of channeling the old magic, the same magic that once bound packs together, healed the sick, and in rare cases, could calm even the most violent of wars. A true Luna hymn, sung by a true Sable Moon descendant, has not echoed through these lands in 3 generations. The hall had gone utterly silent again, every wolf hanging on his words. My grandmother spoke of the Purge, Cale continued, his jaw tightening. Rival territories, threatened by the influence such a bloodline commanded, hunted the Sable Moon women, almost to extinction. Those who survived, scattered, hid, changed their names, buried their heritage, so deeply that even their own descendants might never know what they carried. His eyes flicked back to Alira. It appears your mother did exactly that. Alira felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her, the weight of this revelation crashing over her all at once. Everything about her mother's careful secrecy, her insistence on quiet, her fear whenever Alira had, as a small child, hummed idly while doing chores, suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. I need to see any records this pack retains of your mother's arrival, Cale said, turning back toward Alpha Garen with renewed authority. Immediately. Of course, Your Majesty, Garen stammered, already gesturing for a servant to fetch the pack archivist. While the hall buzzed with tension and speculation, Priya, who had started this entire disaster with her cruel joke, seemed to shrink smaller and smaller in her seat, her earlier confidence entirely gone. Damon would not meet Alira's eyes at all, his expression caught somewhere between shock and something that looked uncomfortably close to regret. Alira barely noticed either of them. Her attention remained fixed on Cale, on the strange gravity of a man who moments ago had been nothing more than a distant, untouchable king, and who now stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell the clean, sharp scent of pine, and something distinctly, uniquely him. Your Majesty, she said quietly, once the hall had returned to a low murmur of conversation, and the archivist had scurried off to retrieve old records. What happens now, if what you say is true? Cale's storm-gray eyes settled on her again, and for a moment, something almost gentle passed through his expression, a crack in the composed authority he wore like armor. Now, he said, everything changes. For you, and I suspect, for me as well. Alira did not fully understand what he meant, not yet, but as the archivist returned with a stack of aging documents, and as Alpha Garen's hands trembled while sorting through them under the king's watchful eye, she felt the first true stirrings of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, tangled together with fear, and something else entirely new. The night was far from over, and Alira sensed, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her quiet, invisible life had ended the moment she opened her mouth to sing. The documents told a story Alpha Garen clearly wished had stayed buried. Cale sat at a small table near the hearth, having ordered the head table cleared, so he could review the pack's old records in relative privacy, though privacy in a hall full of curious wolves proved difficult to achieve. Alira stood nearby, still uncertain whether she had been dismissed or summoned to remain, her hands twisted together in front of her plain gray dress. The archivist, an elderly beta named Corwin, spread the yellowed papers across the table with visibly shaking hands. These are the original transfer documents, Your Majesty, from when the woman named Wren joined our pack. 23 years ago, if the dates are accurate. Cale leaned forward, scanning the faded ink with sharp focus. There is no origin pack listed here. No sponsoring Alpha, no family name, nothing beyond her first name and the date of her arrival. Alpha Garen's father accepted her without formal documentation, Corwin admitted, glancing nervously toward Garen. It was unusual, even at the time, but she asked for sanctuary, and the previous Alpha granted it without asking many questions. Garen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My father said she arrived injured, half-starved. He took pity on her. Convenient, Cale murmured, though there was no real accusation in his tone, only calculation, the sharp mind of a ruler, assembling pieces of a puzzle that had suddenly become critically important. He turned toward Alira. Do you remember anything else about your mother? Any detail, no matter how small, could matter. Alira thought carefully, searching through memories that had grown hazy with time and grief. Her mother had died from a lung sickness when Alira was only 12 years old, leaving her essentially alone in a pack that had never fully welcomed either of them. She had a small pendant, Alira said slowly, the memory surfacing unexpectedly. Silver, shaped like a crescent moon, with a single dark stone in the center. She wore it every day, but on the night she died, she took it off and told me to hide it, to never show it to anyone from Ashwood. Cale went very still. Do you still have it? Yes, Alira's voice caught slightly. I have kept it hidden all these years, exactly as she asked. I need to see it, Cale said, his voice carrying an urgency that made several nearby wolves lean in curiously. Tonight, if possible. Alira nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety at the thought of retrieving something so precious, so carefully protected, and bringing it into a hall full of prying eyes. It is in my quarters. I can fetch it now. I will accompany you, Cale said, already rising from his seat. The suggestion sent an immediate ripple of scandalized whispers through the surrounding tables. An unmated Alpha King, walking alone with an unmated Omega servant, even for something as innocent as retrieving a pendant, was the kind of scenario that would fuel gossip for weeks. Alira felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or something else entirely, she could not quite say. That would not be appropriate, Your Majesty, Alpha Garen said quickly, clearly eager to reassert some measure of control over a situation spiraling entirely beyond his understanding. Perhaps a chaperone. I did not ask for your opinion on propriety, Cale said, his tone sharpening into something that instantly silenced Garen's objection. This concerns matters far beyond your pack's social customs. Corwin, you may accompany us, if it eases anyone's concerns. The old archivist looked startled to be volunteered, but nodded quickly, gathering himself to follow, as Alira led the way out of the great hall, down the narrow servant corridors she knew better than anyone, toward the small, sparse room she had called her own since childhood. The walk felt surreal. Alira had spent years moving through these halls unnoticed, invisible to everyone around her, and now she walked with the most powerful alpha in the Western Territories close behind her, his presence so overwhelming that she could feel it like heat against her back even without touching him. You seem troubled, Cale said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear it, Corwin trailing a respectful distance behind them. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but tonight has been rather overwhelming, Alira admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. An hour ago I was refilling wine cups. Now you are telling me I might belong to some ancient, powerful bloodline that everyone believed was extinct. I understand the feeling better than you might imagine, Cale said, something wry and almost gentle threading through his tone. Discovering that everything you believed about your place in the world was wrong tends to be disorienting, regardless of which direction that discovery pushes you. Alira glanced sideways at him, curious despite herself. What do you mean? Cale was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. My own mother came from a minor branch pack, considered unremarkable by most royal standards. When she was chosen by my father, many believed the match beneath him. She spent years proving herself worthy of a crown people whispered she never deserved. I watched that struggle throughout my entire childhood. His storm-gray eyes flicked toward her. I recognized the particular exhaustion of being underestimated. Something in his words settled unexpectedly into Alira's chest, a strange kind of understanding passing between them that she had not expected to find with a king, of all people. She said nothing, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly as they reached the narrow door of her small room. Wait here, she said softly, slipping inside while Cale and Corwin remained in the corridor. Her room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small wooden chest, sparse and plain, nothing like the grand chambers she imagined existed elsewhere in the pack house. She knelt beside the chest, running her fingers along the underside of the lid until she found the small hidden compartment her mother had shown her years ago, a compartment few would ever think to search for. The pendant lay exactly where she had left it, wrapped carefully in a scrap of soft cloth. She lifted it out with careful, reverent hands, the silver crescent moon catching what little light filtered through her small window, the dark stone at its center seeming almost to pulse faintly, though Alira told herself that was surely her imagination. She carried it back out to the corridor and held it up for Cale to examine. The moment his eyes landed on the pendant, his entire posture changed. He went utterly still, the same way he had frozen when she first began to sing, his storm-gray eyes widening with something between shock and disbelief. "May I?" he asked, his voice unusually careful. Alira nodded, placing the pendant gently into his outstretched palm. Cale turned it over slowly, examining every angle with an intensity that made Alira's pulse quicken. Corwin leaned in as well, his breath catching audibly. "This is a sable moon seal," Cale said finally, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. "I have seen only one other in my entire life, kept under heavy guard in my own family's royal vault. This confirms it beyond any doubt." He looked up at her, and something in his expression had shifted entirely, no longer simply curious or calculating, but filled with a weight that made Alira's breath catch in her throat. "You are the last known descendant of the Sable Moon line, Alira. Do you understand what that means?" Alira shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "It means," Cale said softly, "that everything about your life is about to change. And it means that this pack, which has treated you as nothing more than disposable kitchen help for over 2 decades, has been standing on the edge of a discovery that will echo across every territory in the Western lands." Alira's fingers curled instinctively toward the pendant still resting in Cale's palm, some instinctive need to hold on to the last piece of her mother she had left. Cale noticed the gesture and gently placed the pendant back into her hands, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment, a contact that sent an unexpected warmth rushing up her arm. "What happens now?" she asked again, the same question she had asked in the hall, though this time it felt heavier, more consequential. "Now," Cale said, his eyes holding hers with an intensity she felt in her very bones, "I begin the process of formally recognizing your lineage before the entire Western Council. And I suspect, though it remains to be confirmed, that something else entirely unexpected may also be unfolding between us." Alira's heart stuttered at the implication, though she was not entirely certain she understood it, not yet. But as they stood together in the narrow corridor, the ancient pendant clutched carefully in her hands, she sensed that the quiet, careful life she had built around her own invisibility had ended completely, replaced by something vast and uncertain and terrifying in equal measure. Behind them, unnoticed in the shadows of the corridor, Damon watched the entire exchange, with an expression that had curdled from confusion into something far darker, something that would, in the days to come, prove far more dangerous than anyone in that hall could have predicted. News of the Sable Moon revelation spread through Ashwood Pack like fire through dry grass. By morning, every wolf in the territory had heard some version of the story, twisted and embellished with each retelling, until the quiet kitchen servant who had once been publicly rejected became, in the space of a single night, the most talked-about figure in Pack history. Alira woke to find her small room besieged by curious eyes peering through the narrow window, whispers echoing in the corridor outside her door, and an entirely unfamiliar sensation of being watched that made her stomach churn with anxiety. She dressed quickly, pulling on her usual plain gray servant's clothing out of habit, though something told her the day ahead would look nothing like the ones before it. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Corwin waiting, looking flustered and slightly out of breath. "The king has requested your presence in the council chamber," he said, wringing his hands together nervously. "Immediately, if possible." Alira's stomach tightened, but she nodded, following the old archivist through corridors that felt strangely unfamiliar, despite having walked them her entire life. Every servant she passed either stared openly or deliberately avoided her gaze, as though uncertain how to behave around someone whose status had shifted so dramatically overnight. The council chamber, a room Alira had never once entered in 22 years of living in Ashwood Pack, buzzed with tense energy when she arrived. Alpha Garen sat at the head of a long table, flanked by several elder wolves she recognized only vaguely, their expressions ranging from wary curiosity to open suspicion. Cale stood near the far window, arms crossed, his presence commanding the room even in silence. "Alira," Cale said, turning as she entered, something in his expression easing slightly at the sight of her, though his voice remained formal, measured for the benefit of the watching council. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Your Majesty." She kept her eyes lowered, old habits, difficult to shed even now. "There is no need for such formality," Cale said quietly, though loud enough for the room to hear. "Not anymore." An elder wolf, near the end of the table, a stern-faced woman named Halvard, cleared her throat pointedly. Your Majesty, while the pendant is certainly compelling evidence, we cannot simply accept a bloodline claim of this magnitude without further verification. The Sable Moon line carries enormous political weight. Territories will shift, alliances will be tested, and rival kingdoms may see this as an opportunity for conflict rather than celebration. I am aware of the implications, Elder Halvard, Cale said evenly, which is precisely why I intend to conduct a formal verification ritual before the full Western Council, rather than relying solely on the pendant or last night's performance, compelling as both were. Elira's chest tightened with fresh anxiety. What does a verification ritual involve? An ancient blood and voice ceremony, Corwin offered, his tone reverent despite his obvious nervousness. Performed only a handful of times in recorded history. It confirms lineage beyond any possible doubt, using old magic tied directly to bloodline resonance. And if I fail this ritual? Elira asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. What happens then? The room fell silent for a long moment. Cale's storm-gray eyes met hers steadily. You will not fail it, he said, with a certainty that surprised her. I have heard the old songs performed by trained singers, spending decades studying the craft, and none of them carried what you produced last night without any training at all. Whatever doubts the council holds, I hold none. Elder Halvard did not look entirely convinced, but she inclined her head slightly, deferring to the king's authority, even while her skepticism remained plainly visible. The ceremony will take place in 3 days' time, Cale continued, addressing the full council now. I have already sent word to the Western Council, requesting representatives from each major territory to witness the verification. Given the significance of this discovery, I want no room for doubt or dispute once it is confirmed. 3 days. Elira felt the number settle over her like a physical weight. 3 days to somehow prepare for a ceremony she did not understand, in front of representatives from territories she had never even heard of, all while the pack she had lived among her entire life watched with a mixture of fascination and calculation that made her deeply uneasy. The council meeting continued for another hour, discussing logistics and political considerations that mostly passed over Elira's head, her mind still reeling from the sheer scale of what was unfolding around her. When it finally concluded, she found herself dismissed alongside Corwin, while Cale remained behind for what he explained would be a private discussion with Alpha Garen regarding the pack's treatment of her over the years, a conversation that, judging by Garen's suddenly pale expression, he was not looking forward to. Elira walked back toward her small room in something of a daze, the weight of everything pressing down on her with each step. She barely noticed Priya approaching from a side corridor, until the other woman was directly in front of her, blocking her path. Congratulations, Priya said, her voice dripping with false sweetness that did nothing to mask the venom underneath. Quite the transformation, isn't it? From rejected Omega to potential Luna royalty, all in one night. I didn't ask for any of this, Elira said quietly, trying to step around her. Priya moved to block her again, her expression hardening. Do you think this changes anything real about you? You are still the same weak, pathetic girl Damon rejected. A pretty voice and an old pendant do not erase that. Elira felt the old sting of those words, familiar and sharp, though something in her had shifted enough overnight that they no longer landed with quite the same devastating weight they once had. Perhaps not, she said, meeting Priya's eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. But it seems the king disagrees with your assessment, and his opinion carries considerably more weight than yours. Priya's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Damon appeared from around the corner, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes lingered on Elira with an intensity that made her deeply uncomfortable. Priya, leave her be, he said, his voice low. Are you defending her now? Priya's voice rose sharply, betrayal flashing across her features. I am simply saying this is not the time for petty arguments, Damon replied, though his gaze never left Elira's face. Things have changed. Elira did not wait to hear more. She slipped past both of them, retreating toward her room, with her heart pounding, and her thoughts tangled in confusion. The last thing she wanted was to become entangled once again in whatever complicated feelings Damon still harbored, especially now, with so much else already threatening to overwhelm her. Back in the relative safety of her small room, Alira sat on the edge of her narrow bed and pulled the pendant from beneath her collar, where she had taken to wearing it constantly since retrieving it from the hidden compartment. The silver crescent moon caught the dim afternoon light, the dark stone at its center seeming, once again, to pulse faintly beneath her gaze. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, she found Cale standing in the corridor, alone, his expression softer than the formal mask he had worn throughout the council meeting. "May I come in?" he asked, briefly. "I know it is improper, but I wanted to speak with you privately, away from council politics and pack gossip." Alira hesitated only a moment before stepping aside, allowing him to enter the small, sparse room that suddenly felt even smaller, with his imposing presence filling it. "I wanted to apologize," Cale said once the door was closed, his storm-gray eyes serious, "for the chaos that has descended on your life so suddenly. I know this is overwhelming, and I know the council's scrutiny will only intensify in the coming days." "You have nothing to apologize for," Alira said softly. "You did not create the circumstances of my birth, or my mother's decision to hide our lineage." "Perhaps not," Cale said, stepping closer. "But I intend to ensure that whatever happens next, you are treated with the respect and consideration you deserved all along, and were denied by everyone around you until last night." His voice softened further. "That is a promise I intend to keep, regardless of how the verification ceremony concludes." Alira looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of the same manipulation or cruelty she had grown so accustomed to expecting from those around her, and found none. Only a steady, quiet sincerity that made something warm bloom unexpectedly in her chest. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to find more adequate words for the strange, tentative hope beginning to take root inside her. Cale's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back, clearing his throat slightly. "Rest, if you can. The coming days will demand a great deal from you." He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back. "For what it is worth, Alira, whatever the ceremony reveals, I already believe I know the truth." He left before she could ask him to elaborate, leaving her alone once more in her small room, the pendant warm against her palm, her heart caught somewhere between fear and a fragile, unfamiliar hope that refused to be extinguished, no matter how hard the old, careful part of her tried to smother it. The 3 days leading up to the verification ceremony passed in a blur of preparation, tension, and increasingly uncomfortable attention. Alira found herself relocated from her small servants' quarters to a modest but significantly larger room near the packhouse's guest wing, a change ordered directly by Cale over Alpha Garen's poorly concealed objections. The new room felt strange and unfamiliar, too spacious, too quiet, stripped of the small comforts she had accumulated over years in her old space. Corwin visited daily, patiently explaining fragments of Sable Moon history that had survived the Great Purge, filling in gaps in her understanding with careful reverence. Alira absorbed everything he shared with a hunger she had not expected, desperate to understand the heritage her mother had spent her entire life hiding from her. The Sable Moon women were healers as much as singers, Corwin explained on the second day, spreading old texts across a small table in her new quarters. Their voices could calm violent pacts, ease illness, even mend fractured bonds between mates. It is said the old wars between territories only ended because a Sable Moon Luna sang peace into the hearts of warring kings. "And the purge?" Alira asked quietly. "What happened?" Corwin's expression grew somber. "Fear, mostly. Rival territories worried that whichever kingdom controlled a Sable Moon bloodline would hold unmatched influence, able to sway alliances and calm rebellions with a single performance. Rather than risk that power falling into a rival's hands, several kingdoms conspired together to eliminate the entire bloodline. Only a small handful escaped, scattering across the Western territories, hiding their heritage so thoroughly that even their own descendants often never learned the truth." Alira absorbed this information with a heavy heart, thinking of her mother, forced to flee everything she had known, forced to bury her own identity so completely that she died without ever telling her daughter the full truth. The sacrifice felt staggering now, understood in its proper context. Throughout those 3 days, Alira also found herself increasingly, unexpectedly, in Cale's company. He visited each evening, ostensibly to discuss ceremony logistics, though their conversations often wandered far beyond practical matters, into quieter, more personal territory. She learned about his own difficult path toward the throne, the pressures of ruling territories still recovering from old conflicts, the loneliness of a position that offered enormous power alongside crushing isolation. In turn, she found herself sharing pieces of her own life she had never spoken aloud to anyone, the quiet grief of losing her mother young, the years of careful invisibility she had cultivated as protection against a pack that never fully accepted her, the devastating public rejection that had, until 3 days ago, felt like the lowest point of her entire existence. "Do you regret it?" Cale asked on the third evening, as they sat together near the small hearth in her new quarters, a rare moment of quiet before the ceremony scheduled for the following morning. "The rejection, I mean. If Daemon had chosen you, none of this would have happened. You would still be hidden, safe in your anonymity." Elyra considered the question seriously before answering. "I think, in some strange way, I am grateful for it now. The rejection was devastating, but it also freed me from a bond that would have kept me small, kept me hidden, kept me convinced that invisibility was the safest way to survive." She glanced at him. "I do not think I would have discovered any of this, otherwise. I would have spent my entire life believing I was exactly what everyone told me I was, unremarkable, disposable." Cale's expression turned thoughtful, something warm flickering behind his storm-gray eyes. "You were never those things," he said quietly. "Even before last night, before any of this was revealed, I suspect anyone paying proper attention would have recognized it." Elyra felt heat rise in her cheeks at the sincerity in his voice, unsure how to respond to a kindness so unfamiliar, so entirely without ulterior motive, that it left her slightly disoriented. "The ceremony tomorrow," she said instead, redirecting toward safer territory. "What exactly will happen?" Cale straightened slightly, his expression growing more serious. "You will stand before the assembled council, representatives from each major territory in the Western lands. A ceremonial blade will draw a small amount of your blood, mixed with ritual herbs specifically tied to Sable Moon resonance. If the mixture reacts as expected, and if you sing a portion of the Luna hymn again under formal observation, the bloodline will be confirmed beyond any possible dispute." "And if something goes wrong?" Elyra asked, unable to fully suppress the anxiety threading through her voice. "Nothing will go wrong," Cale said, though his tone carried more reassurance than absolute certainty. "But should any complications arise, I will be present throughout the entire ceremony. You will not face it alone." The promise settled something unsteady in Elyra's chest, a warmth she was beginning to recognize as trust, fragile and new, but growing steadier with each conversation, each quiet evening spent in his company. "Cale," she said softly, using his name without title for the first time, testing the intimacy of it. "Why does this matter so much to you? Beyond the political significance, I mean. You could have simply sent representatives to handle this verification. Instead, you have remained here personally, delayed your own royal duties, spent hours each evening explaining things you could have easily assigned to Corwin alone." Cale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the small fire crackling in the hearth. "Honestly," he said finally, "I am not entirely certain myself. When you began singing that first night, something inside me responded in a way I have never experienced before. Not with any wolf, in any territory, throughout my entire life. My wolf recognized something in you immediately, something I am still trying to fully understand." He turned to look at her directly. "I suspect, though I have not said this aloud until now, that whatever bond exists between us extends beyond simple curiosity about a lost bloodline." Elyra's breath caught, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. "You believe we might be fated," she said slowly, testing the possibility aloud. "I believe it is possible," Cale said carefully, "though I have no intention of pressuring you toward any conclusion before you are ready to consider it. You have endured enough sudden, overwhelming change these past 3 days without adding the weight of a potential mate bond to that burden." Elyra appreciated his restraint, even as something warm and unfamiliar continued to unfurl within her chest at the possibility he had voiced. After Daemon's rejection, she had promised herself she would never again allow herself to hope for a mate bond, had convinced herself such connections brought only pain and humiliation. And yet here, sitting across from a king, whose gentle consideration felt entirely foreign to everything she had previously known, That old certainty wavered. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we can discover the truth of it together, slowly, without either of us forcing conclusions. Neither of us is ready to reach." Cale's expression softened into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "I would like that very much." They sat together for a while longer in comfortable silence, the small fire crackling between them, the weight of tomorrow's ceremony still looming but somehow feeling less overwhelming with his steady presence beside her. When Cale finally rose to leave for the evening, he paused at the door, turning back toward her with an expression of quiet sincerity. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "know that I already see you exactly as you are. Remarkable. Not because of any ancient bloodline, or because of a voice capable of freezing an entire hall into silence. Simply because of who you have shown yourself to be these past 3 days." He inclined his head slightly. "Sleep well, Elira. Tomorrow, the world learns what I already know." He left before she could formulate any response, leaving her alone with her racing heart, and a tangle of emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, fragile and terrifying in equal measure, settled deep in her chest as she prepared for sleep, the pendant warm against her skin. Her mother's careful secrecy finally, after so many years, approaching its long overdue resolution. Tomorrow would bring either confirmation or catastrophe. But for the first time since her public rejection 3 weeks ago, Elira found herself facing the uncertainty ahead, not with dread, but with something dangerously close to genuine anticipation. The morning of the ceremony arrived cold and clear. The sky above Ashwood Pack stretched in pale winter blue, as though even the weather understood the significance of the day ahead. Elira woke before dawn, unable to sleep further despite exhaustion pulling at her limbs. She dressed in the ceremonial garments Corwin had provided the previous evening, a simple but elegant gown in deep silver that felt entirely foreign against her skin after years of plain servant's clothing. The pendant rested against her collarbone, exactly where it belonged, its dark stone catching the early morning light streaming through her window. A soft knock announced Corwin's arrival, his expression a mixture of nervous excitement and reverent solemnity. "The council has assembled in the ceremonial courtyard," he said. "Representatives from 6 territories have arrived overnight, along with elder witnesses from 3 additional packs, who traveled considerable distances upon hearing word of the discovery." Elira's stomach tightened with fresh anxiety at the scale of the audience awaiting her. "That many?" "The Sable Moon bloodline has not surfaced in 3 generations," Corwin reminded her gently. "Every territory in the Western lands has significant interest in verifying whether this discovery is genuine." She nodded, steadying her breathing as best she could, and followed him through the packhouse corridors toward the ceremonial courtyard, an outdoor space she had glimpsed only rarely throughout her years at Ashwood, reserved traditionally for formal pack ceremonies and rarely used otherwise. The courtyard, when they arrived, took her breath away. Dozens of wolves stood assembled in careful formation, representatives from territories bearing banners she did not recognize, their colors and sigils entirely foreign to her limited experience of the world beyond Ashwood Pack. At the center of the gathering stood a raised stone platform, ancient and weathered, clearly reserved for ceremonies of significant importance. Cale stood near the platform, dressed in formal royal attire that made his already commanding presence even more overwhelming. Black and silver fabric embroidered with intricate patterns that caught the morning light. His storm-gray eyes found her immediately as she entered the courtyard, and something in his expression eased slightly, a silent reassurance passing between them across the considerable distance. "Elira of Ashwood," Elder Halvard's voice rang out across the gathered crowd, formal and measured. "Please approach the ceremonial platform." Elira's legs felt unsteady as she walked forward, every eye in the courtyard tracking her movement, the weight of scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force. She climbed the worn stone steps to the platform, standing beside a small ceremonial table where an ornate blade rested atop a cushion of dark velvet, alongside a bowl containing herbs she did not recognize. Cale moved to stand nearby, close enough to offer silent support, without overstepping the formal boundaries of the ceremony. Elder Halvard approached with the ceremonial blade, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious gravity of the moment. "This ceremony has been performed only a handful of times throughout recorded history," Halvard announced to the assembled crowd. "It will determine, beyond any possible dispute, whether the young woman before us carries genuine Sable Moon lineage, or whether recent events have been the result of some other, less significant explanation. A murmur rippled through the gathered representatives, some faces skeptical, others openly curious, a few betraying something closer to hope. Illyra caught sight of Alpha Garen near the front of the crowd, his expression tense and calculating, alongside Priya and Damon, standing somewhat apart from the pack's other representatives. "Illyra," Halvard said, turning toward her directly, "please extend your hand." Illyra did as instructed, her palm trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain composed. Halvard drew the ceremonial blade carefully across the pad of her finger, a small, precise cut that stung sharply but briefly. A single drop of blood welled up, and Halvard guided her hand over the bowl of herbs, allowing the drop to fall directly into the mixture. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its collective breath, and Illyra felt her own heart pounding so loudly, she was certain everyone nearby could hear it. Then the herbs began to glow. A soft, silvery luminescence spread through the bowl, the dried plants shifting and swirling, as though stirred by an invisible wind, the light growing steadily brighter, until it cast a gentle glow across the entire platform. Gasps echoed through the courtyard, several elder representatives immediately dropping into deep, reverent bows. "The blood confirms it," Halvard said, her voice tight with barely contained emotion, a stark contrast to her earlier skepticism. "This is genuine Sable Moon resonance. I have read of this reaction in old texts, but never witnessed it myself." Cale stepped forward, his expression carrying quiet triumph, tempered by genuine relief. "The second portion of the ceremony remains," he announced to the crowd. "A verification through voice, to confirm the resonance carries through performance, as well as blood." Illyra's throat tightened with fresh nerves, though the successful first portion of the ceremony had settled some of her earlier terror. She glanced toward Cale, who offered the smallest, most reassuring nod, silent encouragement passing between them. "Sing," Halvard instructed, stepping back from the platform. "Any verse of the Luna hymn will suffice for confirmation." Illyra closed her eyes, drawing a steadying breath, and allowed herself to sink into the same strange, instinctive space she had found 3 nights earlier, when Priya's cruel joke had inadvertently unlocked something ancient and powerful within her. The first note left her lips soft and resonant, and immediately, the assembled crowd fell into the same reverent silence she remembered from that first performance. Her voice rose through the verses with increasing confidence, no longer tinged with the humiliation and uncertainty of that first, mocking performance, but carrying instead a growing sense of ownership, of belonging to something vast and ancient that had finally, after 22 years, found its rightful place in the world. As she sang, the silver light from the herbs on the ceremonial table intensified, spreading outward across the platform, curling around her feet like living mist. Several representatives in the crowd wept openly, overcome by emotions they could not fully articulate, the old magic within her voice, touching something deep and instinctive in every wolf present. When the final note faded into the morning air, complete silence held the courtyard for several long moments before Elder Halvard finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "The verification is complete and beyond dispute," she announced to the assembled crowd. "Illyra, daughter of Ren, is confirmed as the last known descendant of the Sable Moon bloodline." The courtyard erupted into a mixture of applause, reverent murmurs, and formal bows from every representative present. Illyra stood on the platform, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what had just occurred, her eyes finding Cale's across the small distance separating them. He climbed the platform steps without hesitation, standing before her with an expression that held none of the formal composure he had maintained throughout the ceremony, replaced instead by something raw and genuine. "Congratulations," he said softly, for her ears alone despite the crowd surrounding them. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you have become, Illyra." Emotion swelled in her chest, tears she had been holding back throughout the entire ceremony, finally threatening to spill over. "Thank you," she managed, "for believing in me before anyone else did." Cale reached out, gently taking her hand in his, an intimate gesture that drew immediate attention from the surrounding crowd, though neither of them seemed particularly concerned with the resulting whispers. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "There remains much to determine, politically and personally. But today, You have reclaimed a heritage stolen from your family generations ago. That alone deserves celebration. As the assembled representatives began organizing themselves for the formal celebration feast that would follow, Illyra caught sight of Damon watching her from the edge of the courtyard, his expression unreadable, and beside him, Priya's face twisted with an expression that had curdled entirely into resentment and fear. Something told Illyra that the political triumph of today's ceremony would not go unchallenged, that the very forces which had once purged the Sable Moon bloodline from existence might not welcome its unexpected return, with the same reverence displayed by the wolves currently celebrating around her. But for this single, precious moment, standing on the ceremonial platform with her hand held securely in Kale's, the ancient pendant warm against her skin, Illyra allowed herself simply to feel the overwhelming relief and joy of finally, after a lifetime of careful invisibility, being seen and celebrated for exactly who she truly was. The celebration feast that evening would prove far more complicated than anyone anticipated, but for now, beneath the pale winter sky of Ashwood Pack's ceremonial courtyard, Illyra allowed herself to simply breathe, to simply exist, fully and completely, in the truth she had finally reclaimed. The celebration feast began with genuine warmth, an atmosphere entirely different from the tense, mocking energy that had defined the welcoming feast just days earlier. Illyra sat at the head table beside Kale, an honor that would have seemed impossible only a week before, watching as representatives from 6 different territories mingled with Ashwood Pack members, all buzzing with excitement over the historic verification that had occurred that morning. The Great Hall had been transformed once again, this time with silver banners intermixed among the crimson and gold, honoring the newly confirmed bloodline with appropriate ceremony. "You seem overwhelmed," Kale observed quietly, leaning slightly toward her amid the surrounding noise of celebration. "I am adjusting," Illyra admitted, offering a small smile. "A week ago, I was refilling wine cups at this very table. Now, representatives from territories I did not know existed are toasting in my honor." Kale's expression softened. "You have handled this transition with remarkable grace. Many would have crumbled under far less pressure." Before Illyra could respond, a tall representative from one of the eastern territories approached the head table, his expression carrying a mixture of curiosity and calculation that immediately put Illyra on alert. "Lady Illyra," he said, offering a formal bow that felt slightly too theatrical. "Allow me to introduce myself. Alpha Wren Castellan, representing the Thornfield territory." "Alpha Castellan," Illyra replied carefully, uncertain of proper protocol for her newly elevated status. "Your discovery has created quite a stir among the Western Council," Castellan continued, his eyes flicking briefly toward Kale, before returning to Illyra. "Several territories are already discussing the political implications of a confirmed Sable Moon descendant residing within Ashwood's borders. Some have suggested that such significant heritage deserves relocation to a territory better equipped to protect and honor it appropriately." Illyra felt Kale tense beside her, though his expression remained carefully neutral. "Illyra's future residence remains entirely her own decision," he said smoothly, though something firm underlay his tone. "No territory holds any claim over her, simply due to political interest in her bloodline." Castellan's smile did not waver, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Of course, Your Majesty. I merely wish to extend Thornfield's welcome, should Lady Illyra ever consider broadening her horizons beyond Ashwood's borders." He offered another bow before retreating back into the crowd. He was not merely being polite, Illyra observed, once Castellan had moved out of earshot. "No," Kale agreed, his jaw tight. "Several territories will likely attempt similar approaches throughout the evening. Your discovery carries enormous political weight, Illyra. Every ambitious alpha in the Western lands will see opportunity in aligning themselves with a confirmed Sable Moon descendant." The observation settled uncomfortably in Illyra's chest, the reminder that her newfound significance came bundled with complications she had not fully anticipated. Throughout the remainder of the evening, she found herself approached repeatedly by various representatives, each offering variations of Castellan's careful, calculated interest, each leaving her feeling increasingly like a valuable object rather than a person. By the time the feast began winding down, Illyra felt thoroughly exhausted. The emotional weight of the day's events, combined with the constant political maneuvering, leaving her desperate for a moment of genuine quiet. Would you care to step outside? Kale asked, seeming to sense her exhaustion. The gardens are considerably quieter this time of evening. Elira accepted gratefully, allowing him to guide her away from the Great Hall's continued celebration toward Ashwood's modest ceremonial gardens, the cold evening air a welcome relief after hours spent in the crowded, overheated hall. I apologize for the constant political attention, Kale said once they had found a quiet bench beneath a bare winter tree, the sounds of the ongoing celebration muffled by distance. I should have anticipated it more thoroughly and shielded you from at least some of tonight's overwhelming attention. It is not your fault, Elira said, settling onto the bench beside him. Though I confess, I had not fully considered how significantly my life would change, beyond simply discovering my heritage. Every territory suddenly views me as some kind of political prize. You are not a prize, Kale said firmly, turning to face her directly. Regardless of how ambitious alphas across the Western lands choose to view you, you are a woman who has endured significant hardship with remarkable resilience, who happens to carry an extraordinary heritage that others wish to exploit for political gain. Those are entirely separate things, and I intend to ensure the distinction remains clear to anyone who attempts to suggest otherwise. Something warm unfurled in Elira's chest at the fierce protectiveness underlying his words. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me as more than simply my bloodline. Kale reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and careful. I saw you as remarkable, before I ever learned of your heritage, he said quietly. The moment you stood before that entire hall, prepared to endure whatever humiliation Priya intended, rather than flee or refuse an alpha's direct order, despite every instinct surely screaming at you to do so. That courage revealed far more about your character than any ancient bloodline verification. Elira's breath caught at the sincerity in his voice, the storm gray of his eyes holding hers, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Kale, she said softly, testing the weight of his name without title once again. What exactly is happening between us? I find myself increasingly uncertain where genuine connection ends and political convenience begins. I ask myself the same question, Kale admitted, his hand still resting gently against her cheek. But I know this much, with absolute certainty. Whatever draws me toward you extends far beyond political considerations regarding your bloodline. My wolf recognized something in you, from the very first note of that hymn, something I have never experienced with any other wolf throughout my entire life. His thumb traced softly along her cheekbone. I believe, Elira, that we may share a fated bond, a true one, rare even among royal lines. The admission hung heavy in the cold evening air between them, Elira's heart pounding with a complicated mixture of hope and lingering fear. I want to believe that, she said honestly. But Damon's rejection taught me to distrust fated bonds entirely. What if this connection proves similarly unstable? What if the political pressures surrounding my bloodline eventually prove more significant than whatever genuine feeling exists between us? Kale's expression grew serious, thoughtful. I cannot promise, the future holds no complications, he said carefully. Political pressures will undoubtedly test whatever connection we choose to pursue. But I can promise you this, Elira. I will never treat you as disposable, or convenient, or beneath genuine consideration, regardless of what political pressures may arise. You deserve far better than the treatment you received from your previous pack, and I intend to prove that difference through consistent action, not merely words. Elira studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity, and finding none, only steady, genuine conviction that settled something anxious within her chest. Slowly, tentatively, she leaned into his touch, allowing herself, for the first time since Damon's devastating rejection, to consider the possibility of trusting a fated bond once again. I would like to explore this, she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Slowly. Without either of us rushing toward conclusions before we are certain of our footing. Slowly, Kale agreed, a genuine smile finally breaking through his usually composed expression, transforming his features into something younger, more open than she had yet witnessed. I can be patient, Elira. Some things are worth waiting for properly. They sat together beneath the bare winter tree for a while longer, the sounds of the continuing celebration drifting faintly from the great hall behind them, both increasingly aware that this fragile, tentative connection between them would face significant challenges in the days ahead. From political maneuvering, territorial ambition, and quite possibly, from forces within Ashwood Pack itself who had not yet fully accepted the dramatic transformation in Alira's circumstances. But for this quiet, stolen moment beneath the winter sky, neither of them chose to dwell on the complications ahead. Instead, they simply allowed themselves to exist together, two people cautiously discovering the possibility of genuine connection amid the chaos and celebration surrounding them, unaware that within Ashwood Pack's shadowed corridors, Damon watched their distant silhouettes from a darkened window, his expression twisting with an emotion far more dangerous than simple regret. The days following the celebration feast brought an uneasy calm to Ashwood Pack, though Alira sensed the tension simmering beneath the surface, waiting for opportunity to erupt. Representatives from the various territories gradually departed, though several, including Alpha Castellan from Thornfield, lingered longer than protocol strictly required, their continued presence a subtle but persistent reminder of the political interest her bloodline had generated across the western lands. Cale remained at Ashwood as well, ostensibly overseeing the ongoing diplomatic negotiations regarding her formal status, though Alira suspected his genuine motivation extended considerably beyond diplomatic obligation. Their evenings together continued, quiet conversations that gradually deepened the tentative connection they had acknowledged beneath the winter tree, each exchange building trust brick by careful brick. Alira found herself increasingly comfortable in Cale's presence, the careful walls she had constructed around her heart since Damon's rejection, slowly, cautiously lowering. But not everyone within Ashwood shared in the general celebratory atmosphere surrounding her transformation. She noticed it first in small ways. Odette, once openly dismissive, now regarded her with a careful, calculating politeness that felt somehow more unsettling than outright hostility. Several pack members who had previously ignored her entirely now offered exaggerated deference, though Alira suspected genuine respect had little to do with their sudden change in demeanor. And then there was Damon. He seemed to appear with increasing frequency wherever she happened to be, always with some plausible excuse for his presence, always watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Alira found the pattern deeply uncomfortable, though she initially dismissed it as simple adjustment to her changed circumstances, rather than anything more concerning. That assumption shattered on the 6th day following the ceremony. Alira had ventured alone into Ashwood's small library, seeking some quiet time away from the constant political attention that had followed her verification, hoping to find additional texts regarding Sable Moon history that Corwin had not yet shared with her. She was examining a shelf of aging volumes when a familiar voice spoke from the doorway behind her. "You seem to be avoiding me," Damon said, stepping into the library and closing the door behind him with deliberate care. Alira turned, her instincts immediately flagging discomfort at his tone, at the closed door, at the careful way he positioned himself between her and the exit. "I have been rather occupied," she said carefully, "with matters considerably more significant than our previous relationship." "Our previous relationship," Damon repeated, something bitter twisting through his voice. "You mean the bond I foolishly rejected, believing you insignificant and unremarkable. A mistake, I now realize, of catastrophic proportions. You made your feelings on the matter quite clear at the time," Alira said, keeping her voice steady despite the unease coiling in her stomach. "In front of the entire pack, if I recall correctly." Damon's expression flickered with something that might have been genuine regret, though Alira found herself unable to fully trust the sincerity of it. "I was wrong," he said, taking a step closer. "I see that now. You are not weak, or plain, or unremarkable. You are extraordinary, Alira. And the bond between us still exists, regardless of the rejection. Fated bonds do not simply disappear." "Perhaps not," Alira acknowledged, taking a careful step backward, maintaining distance between them. "But rejection fundamentally alters what remains of that bond. You cannot simply reclaim what you discarded, Damon. Especially not because my circumstances have changed to something you now find politically advantageous." "That is not why I—" Damon started, but Alira cut him off, her patience thinning rapidly. "Is it not?" she challenged, her voice hardening. "Because I find it remarkably convenient that your sudden reconsideration of our bond coincides precisely with the discovery of my ancient, politically significant bloodline. Where was this regret 3 weeks ago, when you called me weak and worthless in front of the entire pack?" Damon's jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering behind his eyes that made Elira's instincts scream warning. "You misunderstand my intentions," he said, his voice lowering. "I am not attempting to reclaim a bond for political gain. I genuinely regret my treatment of you, and I believe, given proper time and consideration, we could rebuild what was lost between us." "There is nothing to rebuild," Elira said firmly, moving toward the library door despite Damon's positioning. "Whatever bond may have once existed between us ended the moment you rejected it publicly. I have moved beyond that pain, and I have no intention of revisiting it now." "Because of him," Damon said, his voice suddenly sharp with an anger that made Elira freeze momentarily. "The king. You believe some fabricated fated bond with royalty offers a better future than what we once shared." "Whatever exists between Chaol and myself is not fabricated," Elira said carefully, refusing to retreat from the confrontation despite her growing unease. "And regardless, it is entirely irrelevant to this conversation. My decision to reject your renewed interest has nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the fact that you demonstrated exactly who you are the moment you called me worthless in front of an entire hall of witnesses." Damon's expression twisted, anger and wounded pride warring visibly across his features. For a tense moment, Elira genuinely feared he might attempt something reckless, his posture shifting into something that read as barely restrained aggression. But then, seemingly gathering himself with visible effort, he stepped back, allowing her clear path to the library door. "This is not finished, Elira," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that sent a fresh chill down her spine. "Whatever future you believe awaits you with the king, I promise you this. I will not simply stand aside and watch what should have been mine claimed by someone else." Elira did not respond, instead moving quickly past him toward the library door, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and genuine fear that lingered long after she had put considerable distance between herself and the confrontation. She found herself walking rapidly through the packhouse corridors, uncertain of her destination, needing only distance from the unsettling encounter and the implicit threat underlying Damon's final words. She found Chaol eventually in one of the smaller meeting rooms, reviewing diplomatic correspondence with Corwin, his expression immediately shifting to concern the moment he registered her obvious distress. "Elira, what happened?" he asked, rising immediately from his seat. She hesitated only briefly before recounting the confrontation, watching as Chaol's expression darkened progressively throughout her explanation, his jaw tightening with barely restrained anger by the time she finished. "He threatened you," Chaol said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge she had not previously witnessed. "Not explicitly," Elira said, though she could not fully dismiss the implicit warning underlying Damon's words. "But something about his tone left me deeply unsettled." Chaol's hands curled into fists at his sides, restrained fury evident in every line of his posture. "I will address this immediately," he said. "Damon's behavior toward you, both the initial rejection and this recent confrontation, represents a pattern of disrespect I will not tolerate, regardless of his position within Ashwood Pack." "Chaol," Elira said carefully, placing a gentle hand against his arm, "please be careful how you approach this. Any confrontation risks appearing as though you are exerting royal authority over Ashwood's internal pack matters, which could create additional political complications neither of us needs right now." Chaol's expression softened slightly at her touch, though the underlying anger remained evident. "You are right, of course," he admitted reluctantly, "but I refuse to simply ignore behavior that may pose genuine danger to your safety. I will speak with Alpha Garen regarding Damon's conduct, framed appropriately as concern for pack harmony rather than direct royal interference." Elira nodded, grateful for his careful consideration even amid obvious frustration. "Thank you," she said softly. Chaol reached up, gently covering her hand still resting against his arm. "I meant what I told you beneath the winter tree, Elira. I will not allow anyone, regardless of their previous claim on your bond, to threaten your safety or well-being. That promise remains absolute." Despite the unsettling confrontation with Damon still weighing heavily on her thoughts, Elira found genuine comfort in Chaol's steady reassurance, the growing trust between them offering a stabilizing anchor amid the increasingly complicated political and personal currents swirling around her newfound identity. But as evening fell over Ashwood Pack that night, and as Elira finally settled into uneasy sleep within her new quarters, she remained unaware that Damon's wounded pride and simmering resentment would, in the days ahead, prove far more dangerous than either she or Cale had yet anticipated, setting into motion a chain of events that would test the fragile bond forming between them in ways neither could fully predict. The confrontation Alira had feared arrived not as a direct threat, but as something far more insidious. 3 days after her unsettling encounter with Damon in the library, whispers began circulating through Ashwood Pack, subtle at first, then growing increasingly bold. Rumors suggested that Alira's bloodline claim had been fabricated, orchestrated deliberately to secure favor with the visiting Alpha King and elevate her status beyond what she genuinely deserved. Alira first noticed the shift in atmosphere during breakfast, when several pack members who had previously offered exaggerated deference now regarded her with renewed suspicion. Their earlier respect curdled into something considerably more hostile. By midday, Corwin arrived at her quarters looking deeply troubled. "There are rumors circulating," he said without preamble, suggesting the verification ceremony was somehow manipulated, that your pendant was planted, that the ceremonial herbs were tampered with to produce false results favorable to your claim. Alira's stomach dropped. "That is absurd. The ceremony was witnessed by representatives from 6 different territories." "I know," Corwin said, wringing his hands anxiously, "but someone has been spreading these accusations quite deliberately, and quite effectively. I believe I know the source, though I cannot yet prove it definitively." "Damon," Alira said, the realization settling with grim certainty. Corwin nodded reluctantly. "Priya, more specifically, though I suspect Damon's involvement as well. Several servants have overheard her discussing the matter with visiting representatives, planting seeds of doubt regarding the ceremony's legitimacy." Alira felt anger rising alongside genuine anxiety. The verification had seemed so absolute, so beyond dispute, and yet apparently determined enemies could still manufacture doubt, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. She found Cale later that afternoon, already aware of the circulating rumors, his expression carrying barely restrained fury. "This is precisely the kind of political maneuvering I hope to avoid," he said, pacing the length of his temporary study within the pack house. "Someone is deliberately attempting to undermine the ceremony's legitimacy, likely hoping to either discredit your claim entirely or create sufficient doubt to justify challenging it through alternative political channels." "What can we do?" Alira asked, genuine worry threading through her voice. "We confront it directly," Cale said, his jaw set with determination. "I will call for a formal gathering, addressing these rumors explicitly before they gain further traction. Elder Halvard's testimony regarding the ceremony, combined with the physical evidence of your Sable Moon pendant, should be more than sufficient to silence any legitimate doubt." "And if it is not?" Alira pressed. "If Damon and Priya continue spreading these accusations regardless of evidence?" Cale's expression darkened further. "Then we will need to address the source of these rumors directly, regardless of the political complications that may arise from doing so." The formal gathering took place that evening, the Great Hall once again filled with pack members and the remaining territorial representatives who had not yet departed Ashwood. Cale stood before the assembled crowd, his royal authority commanding immediate attention and silence. "I have called this gathering to address troubling rumors that have surfaced regarding the legitimacy of Alira's verified Sable Moon lineage," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. "I want to be absolutely clear. The verification ceremony conducted 6 days ago was witnessed by representatives from 6 separate territories, confirmed through both ancient blood ritual and voice resonance testing. Any suggestion that this evidence was somehow fabricated or manipulated represents a serious accusation against the integrity of this council and the ancient traditions we have sworn to uphold." Elder Halvard stepped forward from among the assembled representatives, her expression stern. "I personally witnessed every aspect of the verification ceremony," she confirmed. "The reaction between Alira's blood and the ceremonial herbs was authentic, unmistakable, and consistent with historical accounts of genuine Sable Moon resonance. I would stake my own reputation on the legitimacy of this discovery." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, several representatives nodding in agreement, though Alira noticed a cluster near the back of the hall, including Priya and several of her allies, exchanging uneasy glances. "Whoever has been spreading these baseless rumors," Cale continued, his voice hardening, "should understand that such accusations carry serious consequences. Deliberately undermining a verified bloodline claim, especially one of such historical and political significance, constitutes a direct challenge to this council's authority and integrity. The hall fell into tense silence following his pronouncement. Illyra watched carefully as Priya's expression shifted through several emotions, settling finally into something that read as barely restrained panic. "Your Majesty," Alpha-Garin said cautiously, stepping forward from his position near the head table. "While I certainly do not doubt the verification's legitimacy, might I suggest that such rumors likely stem from simple uncertainty and adjustment difficulty, rather than deliberate malice. These are, after all, unprecedented circumstances for our pack." "Perhaps," Cale allowed, though his tone remained skeptical, "but I would remind everyone present that spreading deliberate falsehoods regarding a verified bloodline claim carries severe consequences under Western Council law. I trust that anyone tempted toward such behavior will reconsider carefully before continuing down that particular path." The gathering dispersed shortly afterward, the explicit warning apparently sufficient to quiet, at least temporarily, the circulating rumors regarding Illyra's legitimacy. But as she made her way back toward her quarters that evening, accompanied by Cale, she could not shake the persistent unease that had settled over her since Corwin's initial warning. "Do you believe that will be sufficient to end this?" she asked quietly, once they had found relative privacy in the corridor outside her room. Cale's expression remained troubled, despite the apparent success of the formal gathering. "I hope so," he admitted, "but I suspect Damon's wounded pride and Priya's ambition run considerably deeper than a single public warning might fully address. We should remain vigilant, Illyra. This may not be the last challenge we face regarding your bloodline's legitimacy." His words proved prophetic sooner than either of them anticipated. Late that night, as Illyra lay awake in her quarters, unable to fully settle despite the day's exhausting events, a soft, urgent knock interrupted her restless thoughts. She opened the door to find Marla, the young kitchen girl who had befriended her, standing in the corridor with an expression of genuine alarm. "Illyra, you need to come quickly," Marla whispered urgently. "I overheard something in the kitchens. Damon and Priya, along with several others, planning something regarding tomorrow's departure ceremony for the remaining representatives. I could not hear everything clearly, but I heard your name mentioned repeatedly, and something about ensuring your claim collapses entirely before the final representatives leave Ashwood." Illyra's blood ran cold at the warning. "Did you hear any specifics?" Marla shook her head anxiously. "Only fragments. Something about false witnesses, about discrediting Elder Halvard's testimony somehow. I am sorry. I could not stay longer without risking discovery." "Thank you, Marla," Illyra said, genuine gratitude mixing with rising dread. This information could prove critically important. Once Marla had departed, Illyra dressed quickly and made her way toward Cale's temporary quarters within the pack house, her earlier exhaustion entirely forgotten amid the urgency of this new development. She knocked softly, and Cale answered almost immediately, his expression alert despite the late hour, as though he too had been unable to find genuine rest. "Illyra, what has happened?" he asked, immediately noting her obvious distress. She quickly relayed Marla's warning, watching as Cale's expression hardened into something dangerously determined. "They intend to challenge the verification again, more aggressively this time, before the remaining representatives depart tomorrow," he said, thinking rapidly. "We need to anticipate their approach and prepare accordingly." "How can we possibly prepare against something so undefined?" Illyra asked, anxiety threading sharply through her voice. Cale's storm-gray eyes met hers with steady determination. "By ensuring the truth remains absolutely unassailable, regardless of whatever false claims Damon and Priya attempt to manufacture. Tomorrow, before the representatives depart, we will conduct one final demonstration, something so undeniable that no fabricated accusation could possibly cast doubt upon it." "What do you have in mind?" Illyra asked, though something in his expression suggested she would not entirely like the answer. "The old texts mention a secondary confirmation ritual," Cale said slowly, "one considerably more demanding than the initial verification, requiring the Sable Moon descendant to channel the old magic directly, healing or calming something significant before witnesses. It has not been attempted in generations, precisely because it demands considerable strength and control that even genuine descendants sometimes struggle to achieve." Illyra's stomach tightened with fresh apprehension. "And you believe I should attempt this, tomorrow?" with so little preparation or understanding of what it actually requires? I believe, Kale said carefully, that it may be the only way to silence these accusations permanently, beyond any possible doubt or fabrication. But the decision remains entirely yours, Illyra. I will not pressure you toward a demonstration you feel unprepared or unwilling to attempt. Illyra considered the weight of the decision carefully, exhaustion and anxiety warring with a growing determination that had been building steadily since her mother's careful secrets first unraveled. She thought of her mother's sacrifice, fleeing everything she had known to protect a bloodline that deserved better than continued suppression and doubt. She thought of Daemon's wounded pride, of Priya's calculated cruelty, of an entire pack that had dismissed her as worthless for over 2 decades. I will attempt it, she said finally, her voice steady, despite the fear still coiling beneath her resolve. Whatever this ritual requires, I am prepared to face it, rather than allow doubt and manufactured accusation to undermine everything my mother sacrificed to protect. Kale's expression softened with obvious pride and relief, though concern remained evident beneath his steady gaze. Then we will prepare together, tonight, for whatever tomorrow demands. And Illyra, he added, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands, regardless of how tomorrow unfolds, know that I already believe entirely in who you are and what you carry. Nothing Daemon or Priya manufacture will change that fundamental truth. As they began preparing through the remaining hours of night for whatever challenge tomorrow's confrontation would bring, Illyra felt the fragile bond between herself and Kale strengthening further, tempered and tested by adversity, in ways that made the connection feel increasingly solid, increasingly real, despite the mounting political and personal dangers still surrounding them both. Dawn broke cold and gray over Ashwood Pack, matching the tense atmosphere that had settled over the packhouse since Marla's urgent warning the previous night. Illyra stood in the ceremonial courtyard once again, though this time the gathering felt considerably more fraught than the celebratory verification just days before. The remaining territorial representatives had assembled for their formal departure ceremony, and word of Daemon's planned challenge had apparently spread, drawing an unusually large crowd of curious pack members eager to witness whatever confrontation might unfold. Kale stood beside her, his expression carefully composed despite the obvious tension radiating from his posture. Elder Halvard and Corwin waited nearby, both looking apprehensive about the ritual Illyra had agreed to attempt. Are you certain about this? Kale asked quietly, for perhaps the 4th time since dawn had broken. There is still time to reconsider. I am certain, Illyra said, though her voice carried a slight tremor she could not fully suppress. Whatever Daemon intends to claim, I would rather face it directly than allow doubt to fester unchallenged. The ceremony had barely begun, Elder Halvard preparing to address the assembled crowd, when Daemon strode into the courtyard with deliberate purpose, Priya close behind him, several allies trailing in their wake. The crowd's attention shifted immediately, murmurs rippling through the gathering. Your Majesty, Daemon announced loudly, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. Before these representatives depart, I must formally challenge the legitimacy of yesterday's verification ceremony. Kale's expression hardened, though he maintained careful composure. On what grounds precisely? I have witnesses, Daemon said, gesturing toward several pack members standing near Priya, their expressions carefully arranged into what Illyra recognized as rehearsed uncertainty, who claim Elder Halvard's testimony regarding the ceremony's outcome was influenced by royal pressure, rather than genuine, unbiased observation. A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the assembled crowd. Elder Halvard's face flushed with indignant anger. That is an outrageous accusation, she said sharply. I have served as an impartial elder witness for over 30 years. I would never allow royal pressure to influence my testimony regarding something as significant as bloodline verification. And yet, Priya interjected smoothly, stepping forward. It seems remarkably convenient that the Alpha King happened to develop such immediate, personal interest in Illyra, precisely coinciding with her sudden bloodline discovery. One might reasonably question whether genuine verification occurred, or whether political and personal motivations influenced the entire proceeding. The accusation, though baseless, clearly found purchase among several skeptical representatives still lingering in the crowd, murmurs of uncertain agreement spreading through certain sections of the gathering. Illyra felt her pulse quicken with anxiety, though she forced herself to remain outwardly composed. "These accusations are entirely without merit," Kale said, his voice carrying dangerous authority. "But rather than continue this unproductive exchange of claims and counterclaims, I believe a more definitive demonstration is warranted." He turned toward Alira, offering a subtle nod of encouragement. Alira drew a steadying breath and stepped forward, addressing the assembled crowd directly for the first time. "I understand the skepticism surrounding such an unprecedented discovery," she said, her voice carrying more strength than she had expected to find. "Therefore, I intend to demonstrate my heritage through a secondary confirmation, one that leaves absolutely no room for doubt or manufactured accusation." Elder Halvard stepped forward, her expression shifting from indignation toward cautious support. "The secondary ritual requires the descendant to channel sable moon resonance directly, healing or calming something significant before impartial witnesses. It has not been successfully attempted in over 3 generations." Murmurs of surprise and renewed interest rippled through the crowd. Damon's expression flickered with something that might have been uncertainty, though he quickly composed himself. "If she genuinely carries this bloodline, such a demonstration should prove simple enough," he said, though his tone suggested he doubted the outcome would favor Alira's claim. "Precisely," Kale agreed evenly, "which is why we welcome this additional verification. Corwin, please bring forward the injured hound." Alira glanced toward Kale in surprise, uncertain what he meant, until Corwin appeared moments later, leading a limping hunting hound, its front leg wrapped in bloodied bandages, clearly suffering from a significant injury sustained during recent territorial patrols. "This hound sustained a severe leg injury 3 days ago," Corwin explained to the assembled crowd. "Our pack healer has confirmed the wound will require weeks of careful treatment to heal properly, with uncertain prognosis regarding the animal's future mobility." Alira understood immediately what was being asked of her, and fresh anxiety coiled through her chest at the weight of such a significant demonstration. Healing an injury of this severity, using abilities she barely understood and had never consciously attempted to access, carried enormous risk of public failure. "You do not need to attempt this," Kale said quietly, for her ears alone, genuine concern evident beneath his controlled expression. "We can find another approach." "No," Alira said, steadying her resolve despite the fear still coursing through her. "This is precisely the kind of undeniable demonstration needed to silence these accusations permanently. I will attempt it." She approached the injured hound carefully, kneeling beside the trembling animal, its pained whimpers tugging sharply at her heart. She had no clear understanding of how to access whatever healing ability the old Sable Moon text suggested she carried, but she closed her eyes regardless, reaching instinctively toward the same strange resonant space she had discovered when first singing the Luna hymn. She began to hum softly, no defined melody, simply allowing sound to flow naturally from somewhere deep within her chest, the same ancient resonance that had frozen an entire hall silent just over a week ago. The humming gradually shaped itself into something resembling a gentle, wordless melody, and as she continued, she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, a warmth spreading from her chest down through her arms, gathering at her fingertips where they rested lightly against the hound's trembling fur. The crowd watched in tense silence as a faint silver glow began emanating from Alira's hands, spreading gradually across the injured hound's bandaged leg. The animal's pained whimpering gradually quieted, its trembling easing as the strange, gentle warmth continued flowing from Alira's touch. Minutes passed, the entire courtyard holding its breath collectively, until finally, Alira opened her eyes and carefully unwrapped the bloodied bandages, revealing skin and muscle that had, impossibly, knitted back together with only faint traces of the original injury remaining. Gasps and murmurs of astonishment swept through the assembled crowd. The hound, sensing its own restored mobility, rose tentatively to its feet, testing weight on the previously injured leg with obvious relief, before bounding excitedly around the courtyard. Elder Halvard stepped forward, her expression awestruck. "This confirms, beyond any possible remaining doubt, the authenticity of Alira's Sable Moon heritage," she announced to the stunned crowd. "No fabrication or manipulation could possibly produce genuine healing of this magnitude. The bloodline verification stands entirely confirmed." The crowd erupted into renewed applause and reverent murmurs, several representatives dropping into deep, respectful bows toward Alira. who remained kneeling beside the fully healed hound, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what she had just accomplished. Damon's face had gone pale, his earlier confident accusations crumbling entirely beneath the undeniable evidence of Alira's genuine ability. Priya's expression twisted with something approaching panic, several of their gathered allies already retreating quietly from the courtyard, unwilling to remain associated with accusations so thoroughly and publicly disproven. "This matter is now entirely settled," Kale announced, his voice carrying clear authority across the courtyard. "Any further attempts to challenge Alira's verified heritage will be treated as deliberate slander against a confirmed member of the Sable Moon bloodline, carrying severe consequences under Western Council law." Kale moved to stand beside Alira, offering his hand to help her rise from where she still knelt beside the healed hound, her legs unsteady from the emotional and physical exertion of the unprecedented demonstration. She accepted his support gratefully, leaning into his steady presence, as exhaustion washed over her in overwhelming waves. "You were remarkable," Kale murmured, for her ears alone, genuine pride, and something warmer, evident in his storm-gray eyes. "I am endlessly proud of you, Alira." As the crowd continued celebrating around them, and as Damon and Priya retreated in humiliated defeat, Alira allowed herself, finally, to fully believe in the truth of what she had reclaimed. Not merely a bloodline, though that discovery alone had transformed her entire existence, but something deeper, a fundamental worth and value that no rejection, no manufactured accusation, no lifetime of careful invisibility could ever again diminish. She had faced the ultimate test, and emerged not merely victorious, but transformed, standing fully and completely in the truth of who she had always been, waiting patiently, beneath years of careful concealment, for exactly this moment of undeniable revelation. In the weeks that followed the healing demonstration, Ashwood Pack transformed into something Alira barely recognized from her years of quiet, invisible service. The remaining territorial representatives departed with formal declarations of respect and recognition, carrying word of the confirmed Sable Moon bloodline back to their respective territories. Alpha Castellan's parting words carried genuine warmth rather than calculated political interest, his earlier ambitious overtures replaced by sincere respect for what Alira had demonstrated through her remarkable healing ability. Damon and Priya, publicly humiliated by their failed attempt to discredit her legitimate claim, retreated into a diminished status within Ashwood Pack, their earlier social standing considerably tarnished by their transparent scheming. Alpha Garen, mindful of the political implications of harboring such openly disgraced pack members, quietly stripped Damon of his position as heir apparent, redistributing that responsibility among more suitable candidates within the pack's leadership structure. Alira found herself, somewhat to her own continued disbelief, formally welcomed into the Western Council's recognition as a significant figure among the shifter territories, her Sable Moon heritage granting her status and respect that extended far beyond anything she had previously imagined possible for her life. But amid all this dramatic transformation, the steadiest and most treasured development remained the deepening bond between herself and Kale, which had grown considerably stronger throughout the trials and challenges of recent weeks. "You seem thoughtful," Kale observed one evening, as they sat together in the same small ceremonial garden where he had first acknowledged the possibility of their fated connection. "I am considering how dramatically my life has changed," Alira admitted, glancing up at him with a soft smile. "A month ago, I was invisible kitchen staff, publicly rejected, and thoroughly convinced of my own insignificance. Now I stand recognized among Western Council territories, having healed a grievously injured animal through abilities I did not know I possessed, until desperation forced me to attempt them." "You have handled every challenge with remarkable grace," Kale said, reaching for her hand, his fingers intertwining naturally with hers. "I confess, however, that I find myself equally preoccupied with considering our future, beyond the political recognition and heritage confirmation that first brought us together." Alira's heart quickened at the implication underlying his words. "What exactly are you considering?" Kale turned to face her directly, his storm-gray eyes holding an intensity and vulnerability she had grown to recognize and treasure over their weeks together. "I am considering," he said carefully, "formally requesting a mate bond between us, Alira, not merely because of political convenience, or because our combined heritage would create considerable strategic advantage among the Western territories, though I acknowledge those factors exist. But because throughout these weeks of challenge and celebration alike, I have come to genuinely, completely love you, for exactly who you are, beyond any bloodline or title. Illyra's breath caught, tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes, at the sincerity underlying his words. "Kale," she said softly, "after everything with Damon, I promised myself I would never again allow myself such vulnerability with a mate bond. And yet, throughout these recent weeks, you have shown me consistently, patiently, that genuine connection looks entirely different from what I previously experienced. I love you as well," she continued, the words feeling both terrifying and profoundly liberating, to finally voice aloud, completely, and without reservation. "I would be honored to accept a mate bond between us. Kale Draven." Kale's expression transformed with obvious joy and relief, and he drew her gently into his arms, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt like the culmination of everything they had built together, throughout weeks of adversity and growing trust. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Kale rested his forehead gently against hers. "Then let us formalize this bond properly," he said softly, "before the full Western Council, celebrating not merely the confirmation of your extraordinary heritage, but the genuine love we have discovered together throughout this remarkable journey." The formal mating ceremony took place 3 weeks later, in a celebration that dwarfed even the earlier verification gathering in scale and significance. Representatives from every Western territory attended, along with every member of Ashwood Pack, gathered to witness the union between their Alpha King and the remarkable Sable Moon descendant who had transformed from invisible kitchen servant into celebrated royal Luna. Illyra stood before the assembled crowd in ceremonial robes far grander than anything she had previously imagined wearing, the ancient pendant resting prominently against her collarbone, her mother's careful secrecy finally, completely honored through this triumphant celebration of everything Ren had sacrificed to protect. As Elder Halvard performed the formal mating ceremony, binding Illyra and Kale together not merely through ancient ritual, but through the genuine fated bond that had grown steadily stronger throughout their weeks together, Illyra felt an overwhelming sense of completion settle over her, a rightness that extended far beyond simple political recognition or restored heritage. She thought of her mother, watching somehow from wherever spirits journeyed after death, hopefully witnessing her daughter's transformation from careful, hidden invisibility into celebrated, beloved recognition. She thought of the years of quiet suffering, the public rejection that had once felt like the absolute lowest point of her existence, now transformed through hindsight into the necessary catalyst that had ultimately led her toward this moment of profound joy and belonging. When Elder Halvard finally pronounced the mate bond formally sealed, the assembled crowd erupted into celebration, cheers and applause echoing across Ashwood Pack's grand courtyard. Kale drew Illyra into another kiss, this one carrying the weight and promise of their formal union, before turning to address the assembled crowd as her mate, her equal, her partner throughout whatever challenges their future together might bring. "Let it be known," Kale announced, his voice carrying clearly across the jubilant crowd, "that this union represents not merely the restoration of an ancient bloodline, though that alone carries profound significance for our Western territories. It represents the triumph of genuine worth over unjust prejudice, of resilience over cruelty, of love discovered through adversity, rather than convenient circumstance." He turned to Illyra, his storm-gray eyes holding hers with unmistakable devotion. "My Luna, my mate, my equal in every meaningful sense. Together, we will build a future worthy of the courage and strength you have demonstrated throughout this remarkable journey." As the celebration continued late into the evening, Illyra found herself surrounded by genuine warmth and recognition, from wolves who had once dismissed her entirely, transformed now into sincere celebration of everything she had overcome, and everything she had ultimately become. Marla and Corwin celebrated alongside her with genuine joy, having remained steadfast allies throughout her entire transformation. Even Alpha Garen, humbled considerably by recent events, offered sincere apologies for his pack's historical mistreatment of both Illyra and her mother. Damon and Priya were notably absent from the celebration, their diminished status within Ashwood Pack making their presence at such a significant gathering entirely inappropriate. Illyra felt no particular satisfaction in their continued humiliation, having moved beyond the anger and hurt of their earlier cruelty toward a place of genuine peace and forgiveness, though she remained grateful that their influence over her life had ended so definitively. Late that night, as the celebration finally wound down and the Western Territories representatives retired to their guest quarters, Elira and Cale found themselves alone once again in the quiet ceremonial garden where their bond had first been acknowledged weeks earlier. "Are you happy?" Cale asked softly, his arm wrapped securely around her shoulders as they gazed up at the star-filled winter sky. "Completely," Elira answered, leaning contentedly into his warmth. "I spent so many years believing myself unworthy of genuine happiness, convinced that invisibility offered the only viable protection against a world that seemed determined to diminish my worth. I never imagined I would find myself here, celebrated and loved exactly as I am, standing beside someone who sees my true value, beyond any bloodline or title." "You were always worthy," Cale said firmly, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "The world simply failed to recognize it, until circumstances forced that recognition into undeniable clarity. But Elira, know this. I would have loved you regardless of any ancient bloodline, regardless of any political significance your heritage carries. I fell in love with your courage, your resilience, your genuine kindness despite years of cruel treatment. The Sable Moon heritage merely revealed to the world what I had already recognized in you from that very first, transformative note." Elira turned to face him fully, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude for everything they had built together throughout their remarkable journey. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me, truly seeing me, when no one else in my life ever bothered to look closely enough to notice." As they stood together beneath the winter stars, bound now by both ancient ritual and genuine, deeply felt love, Elira allowed herself finally, completely, to embrace the extraordinary transformation her life had undergone. From rejected, invisible Omega, to celebrated Sable Moon Luna, standing as an equal beside the Alpha King, who had recognized her worth from the very first note of a song she had never intended to sing seriously. The joke that had once been designed to humiliate her had instead unlocked a destiny she never could have imagined, restoring not merely an ancient bloodline, but her own fundamental sense of worth and belonging in a world that had finally, completely, learned to truly see her. And as Cale drew her into another gentle kiss beneath the star-filled sky, Elira understood with complete certainty that whatever challenges their future together might bring, she would face them not as the invisible, discarded Omega she had once believed herself to be, but as Elira Draven, Luna of the Western Territories, beloved mate of the Alpha King, and proud descendant of the ancient Sable Moon bloodline that had waited 3 generations to finally, triumphantly, reclaim its rightful place in the world.